In part 5 of this lecture, we're going to learn more about tests and how to choose the right test or collection of tests. When IO psychologists use the term test, they're referring to any measure of a psychological construct. These measures are more than just quizzes and exams like the ones you take in your coursework. An application that you fill out for employment is a test. An interview that you complete in order to get a job is a test. When you complete a work sample and do part of the job, that is also a test. IO psychologists look for tests that are as objective as possible and follow a standardized procedure to administer those tests. A test battery is a collection of tests, more than one test that we use in a specific situation. We might use an application, an interview, and a work sample to hire employees. This would be a test battery. In some cases, with some tests, we use norming and norm groups to give meaning to scores. These tests allow us to compare the scores of our applicants, our employees, to the scores of people from all over the country, sometimes all over the world. Some of the psychological tests that we use can be found in what is called the Mental Measurements Yearbook. But many of the tests that organizations use today were created specifically for them and for specific jobs. We can't always find the tests that we need in this yearbook. In general, more is better when it comes to selecting tests. When we use an application, an interview, and a work sample, we produce a more comprehensive view of test takers, applicants, characteristics. The boost in predictability that we get when we use more than one test is called incremental validity. As we add predictors, we get incrementally more validity. In many situations, using an application and an interview is going to be better than just using an application. Now, we also have to work within the limitations provided by our organization, limitations like time, money, and human resources. It would be great if we could use 10 tests to hire for every job, but the reality is there aren't enough resources to do that. IO psychologists have to find that sweet spot, that number of predictors that gets us the data we want, allows us to make accurate predictions, but doesn't cost the company too much money, too much time. So how do we know which tests to choose? There are a number of different things that we can look at. First, what is the test going to be used to do? Are you trying to hire people, train people, evaluate performance? 2, we have to choose tests that are highly job related. We can't just choose a test because it's highly reliable and highly valid. It also has to be relevant to the job, which is where job analysis comes in. We should also consider what the people taking the test will think. Will they perceive this test to be fair? Does it look like a test that we should be using? For example, some people don't like personality tests for some jobs because they don't see the connection between the two. That doesn't mean we shouldn't use personality tests. It's just something we need to be aware of. We might want to adjust the instructions or educate the test takers in terms of why they're taking this particular test. We should think about costs, and not just in terms of money, but also time and people. Reliability and validity, 2 things we learned about last week, are also important. We should be choosing tests that are both reliable and valid. Now, you know that is quite a challenge. That is where IO psychologists come in. That is their specialty. creating, choosing, administering reliable and valid tests that are cost effective, that people think are fair, that are related to the job, and that serve the correct purpose. There are other legal considerations we need to make in addition to tests being job-related. We also have to comply with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, with the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, and all of the other employment laws that have been put into place to protect the public. So as you can see, the answer to the question, which tests do we choose, is a complicated one. Here's a list of some of the most commonly used selection tests. The percentage following each of the tests tells us how much variance the test can predict. After we administer a work sample test to applicants, we hire some of them. When we measure their performance in the future, that work sample test they took when we hired them accounts for more than half, 54%, of the variance in the job performance measure. Half is really good. Numbers above 0.4 are really good. Numbers above 0.3 are decent. Anything below 0.2, we really have to start questioning, is this providing additional utility? Is it worth it? Is it worth the time and money? These percentages may not look like much, but when you start adding the tests together, let's say, for example, the first 3 tests. If you were to use a work sample test, a structured interview, and some type of cognitive ability exam, the percentage goes from 50% to 60-70%. That's what we call incremental validity. When you start adding these tests together into a battery, you can increase the predictability because now you're measuring different aspects of the job.